Hey, good to be with you again. My name is Jeff Fuller. You can certainly find all things on Jay Fuller Interviews, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can certainly subscribe. Just click the greater than icon on the YouTube link, and you will just be able to subscribe to this interview and all the other great ones. But this one, I'm so excited to have Richard Johnson joining the program. So, Richard, how are you?
I'm doing fine.
So,
I
I
hope you're doing
understand.
well too.
I am. You've had an eventful morning. Your wife, was she kicking you, or how did she hurt her foot?
Just banged her foot. That happens, especially early in the morning. So
It does. That's too bad. Hey,
yeah.
I just wanted to talk news quickly. There was this unfortunate tragic shooting in Braintree, and I noticed on your Facebook post that you have a connection or mutual friend to this incident. Could you just share that?
Oh, sure. It was just completely shocking news the other day because the woman who was shot and killed was the mother of one of my son's high school classmates, and really a woman who was a fixture in Braintree as a nurse. She had worked for the town for years and was always at the flu clinic every fall. She was at games at school. We'd see her often, and just a beloved, sweet person. And, to be the victim of what appears to be a stalking and now a murder is just, I mean, it's beyond belief.
What a crazy time in which we
Ah.
live. And could you just share your thoughts on this pandemic, COVID-19? You are a couple years older than I. How do you think this generation needs to respond in lieu of what we're currently going through?
Well, I think we need to look at the countries that have succeeded in controlling this, and certainly New Zealand is one, which certainly presents a great example. South Korea is another, and I think the medical profession, certainly the health providers in this country, have given us the guidelines that will help us to get through this. So certainly, I would. It's really a shame that this has been politicized because it's a virus. It doesn't know politics. It doesn't know
Right.
red from blue. And I think the fact is that in the places that have controlled it the best, it's been the places that have adhered to the medical advice that we've received. So Dr. Fauci and the others are steering us in the right direction. It's been very painful. I have friends who own restaurants and other businesses, and it's been brutal for them. But the fact is that the country will be approaching. I think they predicted now that by July 11th, the death toll will be almost 140,000 fellow citizens.
Well,
That's very serious. If this was the result of a terrorist attack or something, or a poisoning, or maybe it would be embraced by folks of all political stripes. But the fact is that we should be paying attention to the medical people, and that will get us through this sooner. That the big fear, the apprehension that many have, is that there'll be a second wave where we haven't gotten out of the first one
right,
yet. So,
right.
knock on wood, this is unexplored territory for us all, and but I think we derive some inspiration from our parents and grandparents who got through a Great Depression and a World War. We'll get through this too.
Oh, certainly. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on is because you are the curator at the Sports Museum, sportsmuseum.org. However, I have to admit, I had to go back and look up what is a curator, and that's one in charge or one who has the care of. Can you just talk about how you received that position at the Sports Museum and what has it been like just being closed during this time?
Well, to get to your initial question about curating is really that it's a job where you're responsible for identifying the items that tell a story and that comprise really the material that represents a topic. It could be art, it could be science, in my instance, it's sports, but of course, we collect everything from publications to photographs, artwork, equipment, trophies, you name it, anything that helps tell the story, anything that is evidence of the history that we're chronicling. And then part of the role of a curator is then taking the material that they've acquired and interpreting it from a display standpoint, sharing the wealth, really, sharing the material with the public and doing it in a way that really tells a story that becomes compelling, enlightening, and I take great joy in doing that. I've come to the conclusion over many years of doing this that a lot of what is involved with my work is making sure that certain people shouldn't be forgotten.
Yeah.
That there are stories, there are achievements that should not be consigned to the dustbin of history, and so I take great pleasure in, pulling the material out that will help to inform the public of, again, people whose achievements were significant, and I think can actually also help serve as both an inspiration and a guidepost for where we're headed. I mean, sports are one of the great, sort of pieces of common ground in our society. While they certainly aren't perfect, they have led the way in so many instances in areas of, inclusion, in gender equity, and the like. And we try to include those stories within the tales we tell historically. And then in terms of my own experience, I began as a volunteer for the museum in 1982, and then quickly became the first ever employee of the museum in June of '82, and was the only employee for 3 years, and have been curator, all that time, nearly 40 years, and it's been a great privilege. I mean, having a job in sports, especially in Boston. Boston, again, I would argue, is the greatest all-around sports city and region in the world. I mean, we basically check all the boxes in terms of levels of competition, historic context, current championships, especially over the past 20 years. It's
Right.
been really pretty amazing, that this is really, and we're a region really that we box above our weight, as the old saying would go. I mean, this is the actual city of Boston is probably a little over 500,000 people. The region, of course, is larger, but, compared to New York, Chicago, LA, we are a small fry, yet our sports teams on every level compete with the big boys. And so it's something we take great pride in. But the history, again, is fascinating. The fact that, we had 2 Major League Baseball teams for years, that the Bruins and the Celtics were charter members of their respective leagues, as were the Patriots and the American Football League. I mean, we lead the way in sports, and we do historically, and we certainly do it in the present day. So, I have a privileged job to be the caretaker of that heritage.
And selfishly, I enjoy these interviews because I get to, get to know you, but get to relate my story to with what's going on, and then just help share your story with others that might watch or listen later on. But it's interesting what you said about remembering our history, because my son is 18, graduating on Wednesday from high school, excited, daughter's 16. And they kind of,
Congratulations.
well, thank you. And they laugh at the Patriots fans now with Tom Brady leaving and everybody's like not knowing what's going to go on, because all they've ever known is the Patriots and Red Sox being a big world champions. How important is it to understand that there was a foundation, there was a framework where that success came from?
Well, it's interesting. The next time you drive to Logan Airport, you will see, if you haven't already noticed, there's a stadium, which is a high school stadium, right at the entrance to the airport. If you look as you're driving in the entryway, it will be to the right. And that was where, for a number of years, the Patriots held their practices. Now, when they were practicing there was no polyturf. It was a really sort of scorched earth, sort of a grass urban high school field. They probably had to remove broken glass every so often. They would watch game film under the grandstands in the area adjacent to the caretaker's office, screened that they were screened on a bed sheet hung from the rafters, and players would be sitting on bags of grass seed watching highlight films of the American Football League. That's pretty humble origins. So that, these teams, and I remember for years the Boston Celtics would hold their practices at the YMCA in Cambridge on Mass Ave in Cambridge, right near Central Square. And there would always be a rookie who would be handed a roll of quarters to go and make sure the parking meters for the players didn't run overtime. I mean, that's a far cry from basically the new age state-of-the-art practice facility that the Celtics have next to the New Balance headquarters in Brighton now, where they basically have it's like something built by Bill Gates. The early history of these teams I find very compelling, very fascinating. I mean, when the Boston Bruins started as the first American NHL team in 1924, the Adamses, the original owners, were given the charter to start the team on November the 1st, 1924. They had a month to put a team together. So their first game was December 1st, 1924. I'm sure someone could make a movie or could write a movie script about how you put a professional major league team together in a month. I mean, it's just striking, and I'm sure there was some humor in it. But everything here sort of has an organic start. I mean, the fact is that these teams weren't started by the marketing people; they were started by sports people, and I think that shows.
I'm reminded of a Bible verse that says, despise not humble beginnings, or something like that. And it just makes me laugh about when we look at things now. Question for you. Fenway Park is awesome, certainly historical. The old Boston Garden, I remember going, this was 90s even, when it was obstructed seating. And that's what I picked because they were cheaper seats, but you had a kink in your neck by the end of the game. Can you talk about how things have changed? Even Fenway Park has changed so much and had to adapt. How necessary is that while preserving the history?
Well, the teams have had the almost impossible task of maintaining pricing at a level where just average people can go. No mean feat these days. I mean, if one looked at the payroll of the entire American League in, say, 1970, 50 years ago, there are individual players now who get paid more in a season than the entire payroll of the entire league 50 years ago. Now, imagine if that were true with an institution like the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Imagine if the concertmaster was paid as much as every symphony orchestra player in North America, what the prices would be at Symphony Hall. Right. So certainly television, certainly, that helps take some of the sting out of the pricing. The luxury suite seating, of course, has been a boon for the bleacher seaters, which would be me, because they're paying a greater percentage of the freight. So what's really changed the most is the fact that pricing overall has gone way up. There's now variable pricing, so a Saturday afternoon game against the Yankees will cost, twice as much as a Tuesday night game against the Brewers. And that's understandable. That's creative. I mean, that's part of the way the teams make their product available to more people, because you can at least price the midweek games at a level that, a person such as myself could afford. A Yankee game is a rare treat, and I'll go if someone invites me. I'm very happy to. Otherwise, I'm, like everyone else, watching my HD TV. But at a certain point, you wonder, where is the saturation level going to be reached? You have the same issue with things like college tuition prices, which you're about to encounter yourself now that you have a high school graduate. I mean, it is, the rise has been exponential, and so it's a question of access. But certainly, I felt over the years that New Englanders have always been willing to endure the worst traffic, pay the highest prices for teams that deliver, for the real thing. And for years and years and years, we've, Ted Williams, Yaz, Jim Rice, Fred Lynn, Mo Vaughn, Pappy, it's been an unending, compelling chain of wonderful teams, great seasons, and we appreciate sports the way the British appreciate the theater and Shakespeare, and we have an innate knowledge and respect and appreciation of the subtleties of these games. You know that when a Boston crowd cheers you, that you've earned the ultimate accolade. And so not only do we respect great performance, we also respect that unquantifiable thing called a dirty uniform.
Yeah.
So a Dustin Pedroia is admired as much for the fact that he never completed a game without a dirty uniform, as well as what he did statistically. So that's all part of the deal. So yeah, we're willing to pay more, and the owners realize that, but they also realize that the pressure's on them too.
Right. That's a great point. I remember seeing the New England Patriots in Foxborough. This is the year that Chad Ochocinco played, and he had that one catch laying on his backside Christmas Eve. And at halftime, the Dolphins were up 17-0, and the crowd was booing the Patriots as they headed into the locker room. But as New England does, they came back and won the game in the second half. And so a lot of fun to be there, but the traffic was kind of crazy, and the crowd was a bit overwhelming at times. But being a Boston fan is some of the best things you can do. Richard Johnson, the curator at the Sports Museum, what are a couple of your favorite items at the museum? Now, your personal favorites that you have there.
Well, one thing I love is the Boston Celtics first 24-second clock. Now, I love to introduce it to people, because how often can you discuss an artifact that was instrumental in saving a league when the shot clock was introduced in 1954-55? The NBA was literally dying on the vine. Why? There were games that ended with scores like 18-16. This is for an NBA game.
Yeah.
And it was not. They were not getting a lot of return traffic for those games. I mean, that wasn't true with every game, but there were enough games where teams would go into a four-corner stall offense, and it was dreadful. And the owner of the Syracuse Nationals and his GM were at games trying to figure out, how do we make our product better? And of course, there were any number of different offers made of, do we lower the baskets? Do we, add another player? Do we? No. They came up with the brilliant idea of the 24-second clock. And I'd say, of all of the sort of the dimensions, the quantifiable things in sports, it only finishes second to the 90 feet between the bases, which is a perfect dimension. Da Vinci could have designed that, because how many plays do we see that are an inch or two or three?
Right.
And but the 24-second clock saved the NBA, and the clock that the Celtics had, you can tell it was handmade. It was probably made in a machine shop somewhere. It came in a wooden crate that was hand painted with the leprechaun and a shamrock hand painted on it. It looked like something from a school art project. And this was the clock that traveled with the team on preseason exhibition games. So they would hardly ever play games at the Garden in their early days. Why? Because they weren't drawing enough. So part of the mission of Red Auerbach was not only to create a winning tradition, a winning team, but to sell basketball in New England. Really, the only state in New England that embraced the game wholly, and it's a story unto itself, is the state of Maine with its high school basketball tradition. It's incredible. I call Maine Indiana with pine cones. It's amazing. But they would travel to northern New England, so they'd play games in places like Concord, New Hampshire, Berlin, New Hampshire, Bangor, Maine, and Red Auerbach would be driving a car. There'd be one other car. The players didn't like to ride with Auerbach because he smoked his cigars, and they'd have to open the windows to clear the smoke away. And apparently he wasn't a very good driver either, according to some old timers. So, I don't know whether they drew straws on that one or not, but the fact is that this 24-second clock was in the company of these incredible pioneers and these eventual champions beyond champions. I mean, 8 straight NBA titles is remarkable. And the Russell era, 11 championships in 13 seasons. Are you kidding? I mean, it's just amazing. And so this is a tangible artifact of sort of where the team came from. I mean, it's interesting that in the season that Red Auerbach arrived, the Celtics were still playing doubleheaders, regular season doubleheaders, with Somerville High School, local high school team, playing in, I forget whether it was the opening or the closing game. It might have been the closing game. Or no, excuse me, it may have been the opener, so they would attract more people to go see the Celtics. Can you imagine? So, certainly after they drew Bob Cousy's name out of a hat, which is a true story, and then they got to the point where they made the great trade, and Russell and Casey Jones and Tommy Heinsohn arrived, and Sam Jones, and the rest is history. Yeah. I mean, but they had this incredible, humble story. So that's an artifact that's a keeper. Another great artifact is we have this stuffed Bruin bear. It's an actual stuffed bear that was given to team owner Charles F. Adams, native of Vermont, by the way, Newport, Vermont, and as a gift from his first Stanley Cup team. And there's a little plaque on it, basically saying it was a gift from the team. And this was only 5 years after the team had started. Wow. And, here they were on the year they opened the Boston Garden, winning a Stanley Cup with Eddie Shore and George Owen and Hitchman and Clapper and all of the great stars of that team. But how often do you see the actual mascot of a team?
Right.
So that we have on display at the museum the actual Boston Bruin. So those are a couple of things. And then probably the most crowd-pleasing item that we have, and everyone just delights in seeing it, is Shaquille O'Neal's size 23 sneakers. I mean, they had to make the box specially to house those. I mean, where else are you going to find a size 23 shoe? And they are the biggest shoes ever issued to an NBA player. And of course, they're oversized and delightful, just like Shaq himself.
Oh, certainly. Hey, something that I really enjoy and love about you is not just your love of sports. And I want to close with where that love came from, how you grew up. But before we go there, just with the social injustice that's been taking place, and this post on your Facebook page, I really enjoyed about slavery in Brookline. Could you just talk as a nation what we need to do to start really caring and getting involved? I think it's great to uh, like different posts, but I think it's more important that we get out for social action, social justice.
Yes.
In your opinion, what is going to really help to be that balm, that healing salve for our country, especially now?
Well, I think the best way to achieve this would be to have a call and appeal for national service for young people. And now I don't know whether it should be mandatory national service. I know when I was traveling in Switzerland about 20 years ago, I was introduced to the fact that every citizen in the country serves in the military, I think for a year or two. So it was interesting. You'd see folks getting on a train on a Friday to go to training wearing their uniforms. And, it was a mandatory thing. Now, I think there could be a similar effort in this country for any number of agencies dealing with everything from conservation to social services. My son was in City Year for 2 years as part of the AmeriCorps program. Very proud of him for having done that. I think it was a great program for him to be involved with. He still serves on the board of the San Jose branch since he's on the West Coast now. I think if there were something, then would be sort of the equivalent of what the military was during World War II.
Sure.
I remember my father, who was in the 8th Air Force, saying that it was really only until he was in the 8th Air Force that he met men from Texas, Montana, Oklahoma, from all different parts of the country, all different political persuasions, religious persuasions, and it was complete common ground, and many of them remained friends for years afterwards. Now, they may have differed politically on some things, but there was a unity. There was there was a spirit that really should be the best that we aspire to, and we should try to find the equivalent of that now. And I think the equivalent would be having a national service corps where you could do any number of things. It could be in the military, it could be for AmeriCorps, Teach America, and we had similar efforts during the Depression with the Civilian Conservation Corps. I mean, there wouldn't be a ski industry in this country, or at least it would have been delayed by about a decade or more, if you hadn't had the Civilian Conservation Corps crews clearing the ski trails in Vermont and New Hampshire. I mean, that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So there's a lot of good that could be done of bringing people together from different parts of the country, all with a common goal of serving their agency and by extension serving the country, and just having that be common ground, having that be an area where folks could get together. Because now, and I'm probably as guilty of this as anybody, I'll only watch maybe 2 or 3 channels for my news and not watch everything. Although I'll occasionally tune into the BBC and get sort of a very objective view on things. And then you tend to stick to being friends with the people that share your opinions on social media too. I've been attacked a few times. Well, I guess that's par for the course these days. But as I say to friends, I say, we can disagree. Let's not be disagreeable.
Yeah.
So it's fine to disagree. That's part and parcel of America. It's sort of the core of this country. But let's not be disagreeable. And I think there's, that's something we should all aspire to. But in terms of the overall picture, I think finding a way to get people together, especially when they're young, before they're completely set in their ways, and having common ground. And the military was always the place for that. I don't think it necessarily has to be that. It can be other means of supporting the country. And it'd be very patriotic too. Because you certainly can be for America without being exclusionary or without, that there's really a bigger there's a bigger picture, and it includes everybody. And and I think that the reckonings that are occurring now are all very healthy. It's
Yeah.
very good for us to understand the hard truths as well as all that inspires us.
Well, I just heard a good leadership quote, and it said that great leaders ask people to question their leadership. And I think if we invited and asked people to question and help make us better so we could learn, unlearn, and relearn, I think that would certainly help. And I love what you say about service, working side by side, shoulder to shoulder for that common cause. That's huge. But could you just talk, return to your childhood? What was
Yeah,
it about sports that captivated you? Were you an athlete, or was that just something that you did on the side? What is it about sport that really drew you in?
I became an athlete, of course, but at first I was inspired by, I grew up in Worcester, in the heart of New England, and my first sports heroes were the athletes at Holy Cross College in my
Hmm.
hometown, and I would go to basketball and football games and cheer them on. And then really beginning to listen to games on the radio. Not as many games are on TV. Certainly the Red Sox were, but I remember listening to any number of games and recreating them in my head, listening to Johnny Most, Bob Wilson, Bob Starr, and then Gil Santos, of course, afterwards. I mean, we've been blessed with great broadcasters and great
Yeah.
storytellers. So, it's both the games that you viewed, and again, in my childhood, rarely, and then the ones that you listened to when you imagined in your head, which made it come to life even more. And then, when I went to Lawrence Academy in Groton, Mass, a private school, basically everybody has to play sports. No one had to twist my arm to do that. I always wanted to, play anything and everything. I could never skate very well, although I wanted to badly. But I played basketball, soccer, and ran cross country in high school. I still hear from my cross country teammates in high school every week. So what is this now? 46 years later, 47 years later, and they have become, brothers, and we celebrated the birth of one of my teammates' grandchild the other day. I
Hmm.
mean, so sports have been a very important part of my life, and certainly the history of sports in Boston, and New England in general, it's not just Boston, have always impressed me a great deal because, again, you always feel as though you're part of a continuum,
Right.
that, running cross country at Bates College as I did, there is a great track and field tradition there that went back into the 1800s. So
Hmm.
you're basically we're carrying a torch for, a program and a tradition that went way back. And so certainly all of it is sort of combined. And I was an art history student, not a conventional major for a student athlete, but one that certainly led me towards the museum world. My brother is a museum curator, is one of the great print and drawing curators in the country. Recently retired from the art museums of San Francisco,
Hmm.
and of course he shares my love of sports too. And so I grew up in a household where art, music, going to museums, going to historic sites. I mean, I went to places like Sturbridge Village and Mystic Seaport long before I ever went to Fenway Park. So
Hmm.
my appreciation for history, sort of growing up being immersed in it in New England, was always a very important part of my perspective on things too.
Well, I think but being well-rounded is so important, and sometimes we want to be too specialized, especially in sports or kids, and it's best to have all of those factors come into play. Last question, then I'll get you out. The
Sure.
Sports Museum, we want to see that shot clock. We want to see that mascot for the Bruins.
Yep.
When do you think the museum will reopen, and how have you survived during this pandemic without being able to go to work every day?
Well, I mean, I'm on furlough now, so as are many people, and but that certainly doesn't deter my interest and zeal for trying to raise money for the museum and to make sure that we keep going. I mean, and the fact is that our museum continues to do our educational outreach programming while our doors are closed. We are still working with kids in our Boston versus Bullies program. So we continue to be the community resource that we've been. But in terms of coming to the museum, I'm certainly hoping there's a time during the autumn of this year, maybe early autumn. I don't know. If I were placing a bet, I would think maybe post Labor Day, but just how that will be done and how we'll be able to manage, I'm not sure. Certainly, it will be wearing. I'm sure we'll be wearing a mask and doing the distancing that we need to do.
Yeah.
I'm just itching to do it, but again, it's a bigger picture because the building has to open first.
Right.
And the issues that they have to deal with, I don't envy anybody having to grapple with that, because you all know that there is no more sort of crowded or congested event, and of course, from a joyful standpoint, than a major sporting event. And so, do we need to wait until a vaccine has been developed? I just don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where you hope for the best. We certainly have every serious medical researcher in the world is sprinting to the finish line on this. You have to know that at places like the Mass General and the Brigham and medical schools here, that that I'm sure there will be a Boston connection to the solution of this, and then there will be an appropriate Boston celebration when the smoke clears and we can get back to a semblance of normalcy. And sports will be a big part of that, will be very symbolic. And I'm hoping we're at least a small part of that. So cross your fingers.
Definitely looking forward to that day. Richard Johnson, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. Keep telling your story. I love sharing it, and thank you again.
And congratulations on your high school graduate, too.
Oh, thank you so much. Again, Richard Johnson, sportsmuseum.org is where you can find more information, and you can certainly subscribe to this YouTube channel, Jay Fuller Interviews, YouTube, Facebook group, Twitter, and Instagram. We thank you so much for being a part, and thank Richard just for being a part and sharing his thoughts. Always a great follow. Check him out on Twitter as well as Facebook, and be a part, grow and learn, and become better. All right, we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks again.